We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio on the Radio America Network. Well, we've heard all the stories and the arguments from America's democratic socialists on why and how a form of socialism could work just fine in the United States, despite all historic evidence to the contrary. To delve into the economic falsehoods and foibles, we're joined by economics guru and Liberty Nation writer, Andrew Moran. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Andrew, with the recent events in Cuba, it's noticeable that certain members of the Democratic Party, specifically those who identify as democratic socialists, are remaining very, very quiet, almost as though they were naughty children who've been found with their hands in the proverbial cookie jar. Now, tell me, Andrew, is there a noticeable difference between what these self-proclaimed democratic socialists are calling for and what actually happens in the countries that are, in practice, socialist?
Well, everything that the democratic socialists want is what Cuba has: free healthcare, free cradle-to-grave education, a government that embraces currency devaluation that generate a modicum of economic growth, which is, comparable to the modern monetary theory, or MMT, that many of the radical leftists are championing. The chief problem with America's socialists is that they promise endless fruit without even discussing if it's rotten. It's all positive without any of the consequences. And what you're seeing in Cuba for all these years is that rotten fruit, but leftists don't want to eat it. They don't want to, move down there. They don't want to embrace it. They don't want to live through it. They just think it's a socialist paradise, like they thought Venezuela was for after all these years. And of course, you also see the authoritarian tendencies of these socialist governments. In 2008, for example, Cuba introduced a private property measure inside of their constitution. Sounds great on the surface. When we dive deeper into it, policymakers still have control over regulation of what you can do on that land, what can be produced in that land. So it's comparable to these democratic socialists who claim that they still support private property, but at the same time they complain about how housing is commodified and real estate shouldn't be investment. So this democratic socialists in Cuba, they want quasi private property. So it's really talking out of both sides of your mouth with the democratic socialists in the United States and the socialists in Cuba.
Two sides of the same coin by the looks of it, Andrew. So from an economic standpoint, what issues is Cuba facing right now? And perhaps more importantly, do they have the mechanisms in place with their constitution, their legal structures, within the ideology to fix them? Or will they have to break out of the ideology, much as China did, to more embrace a free market method?
Well, do you have a Cuban cigar? Because we can go on all day for what's wrong with Cuba. You have food shortages from the rampant price controls and the assault on private property. You have price inflation that's spiked around 900%. You have the peso that has been devalued by 1/4 this year. You have the lack of medical supplies. The healthcare infrastructure is dilapidated. I recently wrote about this. So just to put this into perspective, there's an outbreak of scabies going on. But the medical providers don't have antibiotics and the topical medicines to treat it. It's exactly what's happening in Venezuela. It's remarkable to see it. Now, do they have mechanisms? Not really. Most of the country's food had been imported. The country, once again, the price controls, and the president said that he will not remove them. So private property is still a joke. A lot of the left will say, okay, well, the trade embargo is a significant issue of what's going on in Cuba. But from all the reports I've read, a lot of the entrepreneurs in Cuba say that it's the government's policies that are contributing far more to the destitution unfolding in Cuba than it is, the trade embargo that was heightened under the previous U.S. administration.
It's funny that we often hear the Cuban health service lauded, and yet they have an outbreak of scabies that they're unable to deal with. You'd imagine if the population were as well educated I'm not saying they're not well educated, but if they were educated and had the ability and the opportunity to actually create antibiotics, you'd imagine they'd do it, especially as this is not a recent problem for them. Now, let's dig a little deeper into what the historical record tells us about countries that operate under these types of systems. Can you give me the Cliff Notes version, please?
So I remember a couple of years ago, the late, great Robert Wenzel he was the editor and publisher of the Economic Policy Journal. He was asked, if you remove the price controls in Venezuela, would there be relief? And he said, almost immediately. So it shows that a lot of these hallmarks socialist policies, they're so destructive in many of these countries. Argentina, Venezuela, Lebanon, Colombia, Zimbabwe, all these socialist countries employ the exact same policies and have the exact same results. It's pretty telling how all of these socialist mechanisms are destructive. If I may, I would like to paraphrase the legendary economist Milton Friedman. He would say that the socialists may not know much, but they know how to produce a shortage or a surplus. And Nicolas Maduro, the new president of Cuba, the Lebanese prime minister, all these people are going for the same Marxist playbook, not seeing any change whatsoever.
Let's jump quickly into that about price controls. How does that work? It's not literally just the government saying bread must be sold for X per loaf. Or is it?
No. That's what the government does. The government does put those maximum prices on all their products. So in Cuba, they have the price controls on a lot of their foods, and therefore, people can't really produce much because they can't turn a profit from producing those goods. Venezuela had the same thing, whether it's flour, bread, cornstarch, whatever the case. These manufacturers couldn't produce anything because they couldn't turn. If it cost them $1. If they were ordered to sell a loaf of bread for $1, but it cost them $1.10, then they can't do anything. They're going to lose money. So why bother manufacturing anything? Same thing happened under the Nixon administration. Nixon administration imposed price controls on milk in the 1970s, and what happened? You had a shortage of milk because of the exact same economic incentives. It's all basic economics, and for some reason, every country, at the very least, every left-leaning country, they abandon basic economic doctrine.
Yeah. Now, a lot of countries, as you mentioned, like my home country as well, the United Kingdom, we have politicians who say that all of the things that we like, whether we like them or not, such as the National Health Service, things like this, that they are socialist concepts in practice. Now, the reality is that the budget for the National Health Service in the UK has doubled in the past year. And it just seems to be a monster that insists on being fed. Now, Cuba has a similar health service with all operators being government run. Now, when politicians, they espouse this type of thinking, are they being disingenuous? Are they lying to just further the socialist cause? Because it seems to me that without the free market support structures footing the bill for these health services, these national health services, we just couldn't afford the burden.
Yeah, I refer to it as creeping socialism. You have the ratchet effect where you have one socialist program, and then in order to cure the failures of that socialist program, you impose even more socialism to somehow provide a modicum of relief. But as you said, it's comical when all these leftists they say there should be no billionaires. But who do you think pay for things like the National Health Service or all these other big government progressive programs in the United States, Canada, England, whatever the case? In the United States, if you comb through all the U.S. IRS data, it's a top 5% of income earners that pay most of the country's tax bills. So you're right. This guy claims that these programs save money. They're monsters that need to be routinely fed. The problem with all of these programs is they start small, and then they metastasize, they balloon. And before you know it, they grow and grow and grow and require new taxes to pay for all of these projects. And it never ends. It's comparable to every tax proposal. Every politician says, okay, we need this new tax just to pay for this. It's just gonna be 0.25%. But then as time goes by, it expands 0.5%, and it keeps building. And in socialism, once a policy fails, leaders think, okay, I can solve this with another government boondoggle that's going to mask the problem of the first one, and it just everything becomes more destructive, and it ruins everything. Before you know it, the whole country's in ruins. The
Sisyphean efforts of tax collectors, right?
Yes.
Now, final question for you, Andrew. What do you predict for the Cuban economy, and more importantly, the Cuban people going forward? Are there any bright lights on the horizon?
Well, I'm generally a skeptic, so I'm going to say no, there isn't a light on the horizon. I'm usually cynical of uprising, mainly because a lot of these anti-government demonstrations, whether it's in Latin America, Africa, Asia, whatever the case, they're not free market uprisings. They still want government control of somewhat. It's just there's no difference about it. What happened in the aftermath of the Arab Spring? Not much. What happened during the protests in Venezuela last year? Not too much, except more empanadas for Nicolas Maduro. I'm especially cynical if there's any evidence whatsoever of neoconservatives being involved. So far, I haven't delved too much into it. So who knows if neocons have any footprints in the Cuban demonstrations going on. I will say that I'm pretty sure the Cuban government is very grateful that that Atlantic storm is brewing that could hit landfall in Cuba soon. So that could either postpone the inevitable or that could wipe out the demonstrators, whatever. And so I think you just need to give it time. The events unfolding in Cuba are still relatively young, so things could change in the next month. I hope it will lead to something good. Hope it will lead to a different regime or more of a free market oriented economy. But I'm doubtful.
One follow-up question here, Andrew, for me.
Yes.
You use the term free market a lot, which is really what capitalism is. And I think that the term capitalist itself was invented by enemies of free markets. Correct?
Yes.
Now
it was invented by Karl Marx.
Yep. Now there was a poll that you discussed on a recent Liberty Nation television with Jeff Charles, where I'm not sure of the figures here, but it was the younger generations were very much against capitalism. Is that correct? What were the numbers there?
Yeah, so from my recollection, it was a slim majority. I think it was 54% of young Americans were in favor of socialism and 49% were against capitalism.
Now, that particular poll, was it presented as, do you favor or disfavor capitalism? Using the word capitalism.
There were two different questions. It was, what is your view on capitalism and what is your view on socialism? Do you have a favorable or a disfavorable view of capitalism, and you have a favorable or disfavorable view of socialism?
I want to thank Andrew Moran for being here with the Economic Insight, and we'll be right back after this short break. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.